of Zephaniah, chapter 1, verse 15. Let's start with verse 14. The great day of Jehovah is near, it is near, and hasteth greatly. Even the voice of the day of Jehovah. The mighty man shall cry there bitterly. That day is a day of wrath, a day of trouble and distress, a day of wasteness and desolation, a day of darkness and gloominess, a day of clouds and thick darkness, a day of the trumpet, or the shofar, that's the ram's horn, that was that word trumpet, an alarm against the fenced city and against the high towers. And I will bring distress upon men, and they shall walk like blind men, because they have sinned against Jehovah, and their blood shall be poured out as dust, and their flesh as the dung. We got to be careful, but the word day of the Lord can be speaking about anything or altogether that period from the beginning of the Great Tribulation until the last day of the existence of this world. That encompasses a period of just slightly more than 23 years. And it is in that period that the judgment of God begins. He begins with preparing the churches and the world for their turn at the judgment throne, and then finally it goes into high gear when he comes to the last 5 months of that period, and the earth itself begins to get a real solid taste of hell itself. And all of that is included in the day of the Lord. Zephaniah chapter 1 verse 15, as it's talking about Judgment Day and all that goes with that. That's that whole 23-year period that ends the history of the world and transitions right into an eternity of hell itself. It says that day is a day of wrath, a day of trouble and distress, a day of wasteness and desolation, a day of darkness and gloominess, a day of clouds. Now, just because we see the word cloud, that in itself does not necessarily speak about judgment, because, for example, Christ comes on the clouds for the true believers. And the word cloud is identified also with God speaking in the temple. It has something to do with the kingdom of God itself. In this context, however, as it is coupled with the thick darkness and wasteness and desolation and so on, it is talking about the clouds that are bringing the judgment of God. Like in another place, it talks about great hailstones or lightning, and these again are figures to indicate identification with a time of God's judgment. And God's judgment is not just a single moment on the last day of the history of the world when we stand before the judgment throne of God, that is the unsaved do. It actually begins at the beginning of the period of Great Tribulation. That already was the beginning of the day of judgment.